Matthew Mercer's Critical Role has been going on for years now, and because of that, there's all of this story, all of this world building, and for the first time, you can now play in his campaign setting.
I have a book coming out in August, late August of the summer. It's the Critical Role Tal'Dorei campaign setting, published by Green Ronin, and it's a campaign setting book for anyone who wants to run a game or a campaign on the continent of Tal'Dorei in Exandria, the world that I've created with Critical Role. And I'm super excited. I'm super nervous. It's been a very unique and wonderful and scary and difficult experience, and I'm really proud of it. And I hope people end up enjoying reading it and playing in that world as much as I did creating it. So the DM notes were extremely helpful, and going back through all my old campaign notes and the different sessions that I prepared, I was able to kind of mine things that I'd forgotten about, or things that I didn't fully flesh out, or story threads that I had prepared but the players never uncovered, that I was then able to put into the guide and as a possible plot thread that other people can then explore. So it was kind of cool to go back and extrapolate on and flesh out different ideas that I never got the opportunity to when we were actually just playing through the campaign. But there's also the challenge of looking at a large-scale map and being able to put out the beats and the places that the players have been and realize all the negative space that they haven't been, and the places I didn't have to prepare because the story never took them there. And then realize I have to flesh all this out. I have to make it a living, breathing world with social elements and struggles and cities with dynamic structures and historical reasons for the existence of certain locations, and history for the pantheon and the various ages that brought the world to where it is now. These are all things that I thought about and developed slowly over time, but only for the purpose of telling my players. To be able to have to put it in a book where I can hand it to anybody and go, here, now you have all of the tools you need to live in this world. It was a very daunting, but a very rewarding experience. It is a very cathartic experience, being able to kind of show a lot of the things that never had the opportunity to see the light of day, and to explain some elements of the narrative that the players never explored or we never had the opportunity to really discuss in our game on the show. So it's also just going to be a cool lore book for people that follow the show to read through and learn more about the history of Tal'Dorei, the history of Exandria, how the gods came about, what actually is the calamity and the divergence, where the vestiges came from, how is Vasselheim the only city that's existed through the three main epochs of Exandria. Hopefully it will just be a fun resource for people to read, even if they don't play D&D, but they follow the show, to learn more about the world that our players play in. And then for those who want to play in the space, hopefully provided enough tools where you can then create your own adventuring band to coexist in the same time period, or at least a parallel time period to Vox Machina's adventures. I have created a few archetype variations. I didn't create any new classes totally, because I had to create the world, and time is a limited resource to me, and I had a deadline. But I do have 4 new archetypes. I have a new monk archetype, or a way of the Cobalt Soul, which is based on the Cobalt Reserve, which is a monastery that worshipped the Knowing Mistress, the goddess of knowledge, and they keep the libraries. They seek out lost information, recover it, and then keep it safe in various repositories. So there's that monk path. I have a barbarian path of the Juggernaut, which is they're like the frontline warriors of any sort of ransacking party of roving barbaric hordes, like the Herd of Storms and that ilk, where Grog is from. There is a sorcerer bloodline called the Rune Child, of which the character in the show Gilmore is one of. And they're beings that are born with a certain essence of magic in their body, where the more they expend their sorcery points, it charges up runes in their body that they can then expend again for additional abilities. So it's like you have to spend sorcerer points to charge your runes, and then you can expend your charged runes to do other things. So it turns the sorcerer point resource into a whole, like a secondary system, which is kind of fun. And then I have a blood domain for clerics, which is tied into the blood hunter, and the history of the blood hunter orders is the power of divine blood magic was gifted on Wildmount long ago, and was shunned because of the nature of its more visceral magic energies, and as such, these kind of hidden orders began to branch off. And so there were the blood clerics, and then the lesser warriors of those orders, which became the blood hunters. So the blood domain is now something that I've added to the book as well. So I have those. I have a bunch of new feats that I created, some that are tailored to the world, and some that are just fun ideas that I thought you might want to try and incorporate in your game. I have some cool campaign options. I have a bunch of new ones. I've made like 1 or 2 new creatures, and then I have a lot of various stat blocks for different factions in the world. You know, I'd say humans or other races that you might encounter that are part of different factions and what their abilities would be. And then a whole bunch of information about the world, locations, and plot points and plot hooks that you can use to kind of kickstart any sort of story really quickly if you wanted to run a game in that location. No new spells for this one, because I feel like adding a handful of small spells it doesn't feel as robust. If I'm going to create like a new spell area, I'd want to have a sizable amount of new spells to add. And for the amount of work I had to do on this campaign setting, I kind of had to choose one or the other. So maybe in the future, if I feel it's necessary or I feel there's enough spells that I feel inspired to create, I can add those either on DM's Guild or put into a future book. But for this one, I didn't feel that an addition of new spells was something I could really provide in a satisfying way to the audience. I created backgrounds for your characters can take that tie you into either training at one of the various lyceums or universities of magic practicing in the world or higher knowledge. I have backgrounds for being a member of the Clasp or the Myriad, some of the specific kind of roguish criminal organizations of the world. I have one background that's specifically for being a recovering cultist, somebody who was pulled into a cult and eventually got out of it. Then I've a couple other fun things. I don't want to spoil too much. I feel like maybe I've already overshown my hand a little bit, but it's okay. It's coming out soon enough. So I think people who are unfamiliar with the show necessarily could read this as a primer to get into the series or to help answer questions as they go along to some elements of the story and things that the players are discovering as they go along. So yeah, I can definitely act as that to any of the viewers or anybody who wants to find out more about the lore and the world around Vox Machina. Yeah, I'm hoping, my goal for this is, there have been a lot of campaign settings in the past that I loved, but they read very encyclopedia-like. They were very much just information. You know, there wasn't a narrative flair to the presentation in some ways, and I tried to inject a little bit more of that into it because that's the nature of the game that I run, and I wanted it to be something that wasn't so dense that a person that wasn't as familiar with D&D or as deep cut into it as like me and you are wouldn't feel kind of that first 2 chapters of the Silmarillion, you know, daunting, oh, I don't know if this is my kind of book type thing. So I tried to give it a little more of that welcoming narrative flair to anybody who tries to take a crack at reading it. I've been working on the book off and on for about a little over a year. That involves both just the process of bringing all my notes together, trying to flesh out the world, coming up with ideas that worked and didn't, and scrapping the ones that didn't, and coming up with newer ones that replace those that didn't quite work out. A lot of trial and error, a lot of trying to design places that fit together, and then also leaving enough parts of the world open that you can create in those spaces as well. There are a couple of areas in the continent that I specifically left a little open-minded, or a little open-ended, so that any DM that wants to run that game can create other locations in there that's specific to their campaign. So it's just been learning a lot of lessons, a lot of failure, a lot of success, a lot of trying to put as much of my heart into this book as I can and hope that people appreciate it. And it's been an endeavor. It's definitely been a very new experience. You don't create it and go, good job, it's done. It's a learning process, and it always is. I mean, even the guys who professionally create classes in D&D for each edition, they're learning new things each time they develop something. That's the purpose of the Unearthed Arcana. That's the idea of opening things up to the community to add their feedback and tell them what they, the official designers, might not have figured out. So it's, you know, acknowledging that even the people that do this for a living still need that feedback and that resource of people helping them fine-tune their ideas. Same goes for you. You just don't have that experience yet. So when you're creating your own individual class or class archetype or feat or any custom elements of the game, one, be open to constructive criticism. And thankfully, because of the internet nowadays, which we didn't have when we were younger, we had small forum boards, but you have Reddit and all these great communities that can give you the feedback. Sometimes blunt feedback, but feedback nevertheless that'll help you learn why this ability works in this rule set, why this one doesn't, why this one could be overpowered if it's combined with this other multi-class ability, or why this seems to be a kind of a lackluster, you know, capstone ability at level 20. You know, these are all things that you can learn through that failure. And my first class I ever made, the Blood Hunter, I made on a lark because I kind of made up something on the side for the Vin Diesel one-shot we did, and I was like, oh, people are asking what he played. I'll throw something together and put it up online. And it was fun. And then immediately had the internet telling me, okay, here's why it's broken and doesn't work. And I was like, oh, you're right. Oh, that's really bad. Oh, I'm really embarrassed now. Okay, back to the drawing board. And I renamed it, and I redesigned it kind of from the ground up. And even that went through many revisions, as I learned a lot about what the core balance of the game system is, how the intended designers did it, and what makes the classes work against each other. So, yeah, it's not an easy process. If you're looking into doing any of your custom homebrew content for, like, as far as class design goes, just acknowledge that it's going to be a process. It's going to take a while. You're going to get frustrated at times. I'm working on one homebrew class right now that I've been toying around with for a couple months, and it's been just a lot of back and forth and me going back to my computer and getting frustrated and walking away for a week, and then coming back to it with fresh eyes, and then I'll have a breakthrough. And there's a lot of comparing and contrasting with other existing classes too, and what their comparable level abilities are, and like the damage they deal, how if a DC is required, if it's an attack-based thing, and keeping a balance between combat and role-play-based abilities too. Not everything has to do damage or be a combat-oriented ability. You have to consider things that can be creatively used in a social environment or an investigatory environment or something that isn't combat-focused, so that players have an opportunity to watch that class shine at all points in the game. And you just learn these through trial and error. The Blood Hunter isn't like an official in the D&D books class per se, but for me, it's officially in the Tal'Dorei world. It's officially a class in the overall narrative of the universe. So if you're going to run a game in Exandria, Blood Hunters do exist. The Order of the Clere, which is actually the Blood Hunter orders that exist in the world, as hidden as they are part of the universe. So I consider them official and canon within Exandria. A Blood Hunter is, if you consider like a fighter, is an all-around tough, does decent damage, most weapons and armor, can kind of customize their combat abilities. Barbarian is heavy damage dealing, resisting, but high risk, high reward in a lot of cases. A rogue is very kind of a little frail, but can do bursts of high damage, stealthy. A Blood Hunter is kind of a glass cannon melee character. They can do bursts and high amounts of damage in the front line without having to rely on stealth and trickery like a rogue does. And they can, rely on some magic abilities, and they can ultimately use bonus actions pretty well using blood curses and things that can do minor alterations to how to control elements of the battlefield. But they sacrifice some of their own vitality to use some of their own abilities, and they have some variation in their utility based on how they can research creatures that they're going after and try and tailor what they're preparing towards that specific encounter. So they're kind of like a monster hunting type class, or at least a class that is designed to find the impure darkness and evil that exists in the world and wipe it, and give up a part of themselves to do so. As opposed to the Paladin that's like, I will destroy evil with righteousness. The Blood Hunter says, I will destroy evil by embracing a little bit of it and fighting fire with fire. That was kind of why I wanted to make stand out with the Blood Hunter, was to be a front line with some survivability, but ultimately it needs to be careful or else it can go down pretty fast. We played for 2 years before we even started streaming, in our own private home game. And I mean, a lot of the players' backstories informed some really key areas in the world. Percival's whole backstory in Whitestone was part of a one-page write-up that he sent me, and then I just took that and extrapolated and created a whole, region of the continent, an entire social structure within a city that he just put a name to. And I created a historical history of this location and the eventual overtaking and slaughter of the people that were in power, and his, barely escaping the last supposed remaining of the bloodline. And that gave birth to an entire mountainside, an entire surrounding forest, and an entire society that exists on the outskirts of it. When Vex and Vax told us that they were both half-elves and their father was an elven diplomat from an elven city, that gave me the idea to create Singorn. And then Singorn then began to give me the idea of creating the Verdant Expanse and everything that exists in that space around it. So the players they weren't directly involved in the creation of the world, but a lot of the seeds of their original backstory ideas and suggestions that they made in the early game definitely helped inform the overall kind of build and structure of the world that they now play in. I owe a lot to them, honestly. And as much as I would have created on my own, and I could see kind of a bit of a variation between what I would have done in a vacuum versus what I did with their influence, I could say that I'm very happy and much more excited about what I've created thanks to their influence. As much as you can create as a person, communal creation, which is kind of the magic of role-playing games anyway, can only make it better in my opinion.